Hi everyone, welcome back to Switch Up and to a lovely little sponsored video where we're going to tell you about the new game Project Downfall.
Yeah, this is a first-person shooter, but it's quite different, to be fair, isn't it? We'll obviously go over the details in a moment, but it also has a heavy John Wick vibe to it at the same time.
It does. If you cross John Wick with, I don't know, Blade Runner, you probably get something like this. So Project Downfall, and if you want to win a copy, let us know what you think of it. What's it all about? Well, let's find out. So starting off with the narrative then, well, it's quite a difficult narrative to piece together. You're essentially in a world where employees are given a drug, which I guess helps them get through their day-to-day activities.
Yeah, the story seems to be drip-fed, but as you say, Mark, it has that dystopian feel to it, in where you're in a futuristic city where everything almost on the surface seems idyllic, but you have that idea of being controlled to some degree, doing your work, being kept suppressed and then going home every day until that one fateful day where things change, you know?
Yeah, the game has multiple endings as well, so the storyline does change depending on the actions that you take. There are actually 12 available endings in total. You can also choose some different avenues in terms of choices that you make and the direction that you go through some of the stages.
Yeah, it's never explicit how that's changed the story. It's not like, do you choose this or that? It just seems to be your actions will naturally lead you on a different path as you play, and the game makes a point of saying, as you say, Mark, that there are 12 different endings and it will be very different each time you do play.
It's alluded to early on that the main protagonist, the person you're playing as, has some form of memory loss or memory issue that will affect the way that levels are perceived by him.
Moving on to the gameplay then, and as we did say, it is a first-person shooter, but it's one of those that starts on a bit of a slow burn, where it likes to build the world up before dropping you into the action. You'll see, as we mentioned at the start, that kind of daily routine of having to get up and go to your job. You take the train, and it's that slow burn that really does allow the game to breathe, really, and shows you what this world is like.
Yeah, it does use the Half-Life system of a train ride at the beginning, which is one of the best things you can do for world building, in my opinion. Getting on the subway there, and also between stages you'll go back to your flat and speak to your girlfriend, and you'll be able to interact with the jukebox, or there's the TV in there. There's so many interactable elements within this. It's quite surprising.
Yeah, and it has that heavy cyberpunk feel to it, the world that's built, to the point where the girlfriend, it's never explicitly said, I don't think, not yet anyway, but she looks like a hologram, because if you look at her picture on the lower third, it looks more transparent than the other characters. So it may not be, but it almost feels like a bit of a nod to the newer Blade Runner film in that respect.
There are lots of pop culture references hidden in this as well. I noticed a poster for the game Postal, which is quite cool. I wonder if the devs are friends. But you'll see lots of little references to things like Blade Runner in here, and obviously the token rainfall with the cyberpunk neon. It's lovely.
Moving on to the action then, I guess, once you've kind of established the world and got to that point in the game where you are about to go home from work and then something changes, you take a different train home that day for whatever reason, and at that point where you're starting to be approached by enemies, they almost have like a 2D paper feel to them, as if they're made out of paper. You know, they feel like 2D flat sprites, but that's shown in the way that you attack them, isn't it? You can almost like blast holes through them and they'll flop to the floor while still being quite gory at the same time.
Yeah, it will literally rip enemies in half, and it's those flat sprites, so like sometimes someone will be facing away from you and you'll try and move around them, but you can't because they're completely flat. As Glenn says, it is very gory, but it does kind of poke fun at the flat sprites, having them rip in half, literally with a shotgun in games, right? It rips them in half. But here they've literally done that as if you've taken a pair of scissors and cut them in half. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's quite a difficult game, isn't it? When you start to get into it and the enemies become more frequent and will gang up at you at times, you'll have areas where you're almost ambushed in small arenas, and if you do die, it's quite a quick restart, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that instant restart. It feels a little bit like, if you've played the game Ghost Runner, that's split into almost mini stages where you have to kill all the enemies and then you can move on to the next area. It's very much like that. And you do have to be quite tactical in your moves. Now, you can do a slide move, which slows down time, or you can pop a pill, and I think you've got 3 of those, it shows in the corner, and that also allows you to do extra damage and perform a super kick, and then you can turn environmental objects into projectiles, essentially, which is a nice little touch. But you want to plan it out and make sure you take out the people with the guns first. Now, we were talking about the details. with the kick, if you kick them in the groin, that has a specific effect, doesn't it?
It does. They kind of drop to their knees and their face will go purple. It's just those little details that do flesh a world out. And you mentioned at the start, actually, it's almost puzzle based. Yeah. And I can see what you mean by that. I didn't quite click when you first said it. But yeah, when you are planning out your attacks, you are thinking 2-3 moves ahead if you want to get through those stages.
Yeah, because if they're hitting you with a shotgun from point blank, it's over.
Yeah,
you saw me die about 6 times, didn't you?
Yeah.
So then you move between the stages. It's difficult to articulate how it works because this isn't just action, and then you move back to your hub area of your house. It's interspersed with quiet times. So you might go to a bar and have a load of drinks, or you might be walking down an alleyway and there's completely optional situations. There was one time where there was like a group of gangsters in a toilet and I could have just left them, but being me, I didn't. I went in to see what was going on and they all attacked me and I got in this huge brawl. And then when I came out to talk to the person that told me about it, all he had to say was like, well, just a shocked exclamation mark.
Yeah, and you pick something up there. There are a number of collectibles within the world that are optional, obviously, to find. But again, it does extend that replay value, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. And knowing that there are those multiple endings as well, I guess you'd go back and try a different route. In fact, the game pointed out quite early, why don't you start a second save file and do things differently?
Yeah.
So on the controls front, you have many different options. One that you don't have is gyroscopic controls, which is a bit of a shame. It would be nice to see them patch that in. But it does have an auto-aim feature. I noticed that the auto-aim tended to lock onto the NPCs as well as the ones that you're supposed to attack, in air quotes.
Yeah.
So I did turn that off myself. But generally it felt quite easy to control. You had your slide move, you could hold down for sprinting, or you could have it toggle for crouch and things like that. So yeah, it feels nice to control. A final aspect on the gameplay side is that this city has a day cycle. So essentially there's a calendar and you can see what day you're currently on. It'll actually flash it up in the corner of the screen, won't it?
It does, yeah.
Then you'll have events taking place where there might be a locked off area and it will say this is going to open on Tuesday. And just kind of having that continuity does make it feel more alive than your traditional first person shooter.
Yeah, it's a clever split between obviously the levels and these hub areas, as you mentioned, the house, your apartment, and then these city areas that aren't as big as maybe the word city implies, but they do have a few shops that you can visit, and as you mentioned, obviously that day-night cycle that means certain places will be open at certain times.
Yeah, one of the shops is the gun shop, so you can go in and test out any of the guns that you've currently unlocked and take them to a shooting range in the back, which has very appropriate target for the game. And then there's another shop that deals with the medicinal side, shall we say, and it looks like they're almost modifiers to change up the gameplay style. So it's very cool. There's more to it than meets the eye.
In terms of the visuals then, we've already mentioned obviously it having that cyberpunk influence. I mean, that's not uncommon these days. It's certainly a genre that is popular with game developers, but I must say this is one of the best interpretations I've seen of it in a long time. That first moment where you step out from your house, down onto street level, and you see the things you'd expect to see, the neons, the car types, as you say, the rain, the puddles. But it's handled fantastically well, and it looks great. It's the best use of neon I've seen in a game in a long time, in terms of not overdoing it, not being garish, but giving you the idea of a future fantastic,
Definitely. It has that colourful, clean, but also grimy in one package, which is difficult to recreate, isn't it?
It is. And you have, another thing I love with Cyberpunk is where you have the futuristic world, but it's clearly built on realistic or old school foundations. Like you'll go to the subway station and it looks like one you'd expect to see today, but with a few new mod cons in there or ways to access doors, etc. And it's that merging of two worlds that I think really does make this feel like a realistic yet far away time,
Yeah, and the developers have done things that they didn't have to, that change your experience, like coming across an arcade cabinet and being able to actually play the game. It's nice, isn't it, having those little touches?
Yeah, there are a lot of little details. Some you can interact with and some obviously you can't, but just the fact that they're there, it just makes things feel grander than they otherwise would.
So on the performance front, well, it's targeting 30 FPS and it maintains that for the majority of the play. You will see some slowdowns with some destructibility. So there was a time where I shot through some glass and I did see the frame rate drop down a little bit, but generally it's quite good. Depending on how you are with motion sickness, this perspective with the fisheye lens can potentially make you feel a bit queasy, but that's really, a personal thing.
Yeah, there are quite a few ways that you can modify the aesthetic as well in the options menu. So you have scan lines, the CRT filter, that sort of thing, that you can turn on or off to kind of suit not just maybe your visual preferences, but if something is making you feel, a little under the weather, you can modify it on that front as well.
On the sound and audio front, I'm actually going to start with the sound effects, because there are a number of sound effects that, again, are a little bit extra. So when you go out into the rain for the first time, you can hear the sound of your footsteps on the ground. That really reminded me of Blade Runner.
And the music in general is of a very high standard, not just in terms of what's there, but how it's implemented. So when you first start the game out, I mentioned that first shot of the city as you go down the stairs, you have music playing in the background up until that point where you open the door, and then it goes silent and it switches to ambient sound for a moment, and it just gives you a second to take in what you're seeing, and obviously the ambient sounds help your senses with that, and then it kind of just starts to turn up the volume again. It's very clever.
The weapon sounds as well, they're nice and chunky. Feels like you're actually shooting stuff, and when you have those extra animations for an enemy death and they're like screaming and stuff, although it's grim, it's nice to have that extra detail.
Yeah, there was one in particular, wasn't there, that again where you shot someone, and it is weird because you have the juxtaposition of it looking like paper but still being very realistic in terms of organs and whatnot, and you kind of had this fella's guts falling out, as disgusting as it sounds, but it was the noise he was making at the same time that was, it was like a pig being skewered, which was pretty rank, wasn't it?
It really was. So on the subject of value, this one retails at £21.59, or your regional equivalent. It does say that it's going to take around 4 hours for a hardcore player.
For each playthrough.
Oh, for each playthrough.
Is how it describes it. Having seen you play it for a while, I mean, the tag of for a hardcore player, because you're going to die a lot, and it's going to extend that playtime, let's be honest. And it's just, I suppose, how much stamina or will you have to play for more than one ending. But yeah, for one playthrough, I guess if you're extending that to account for all skill sets, maybe between 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment for most people, for sure. And it looks like there's a lot of extras in there. We noticed a few little secrets, like there was a code on a locker that I didn't have the code for. There's a lot to go back for by the looks of it.
So that's everything you need to know about Project Downfall. A very pleasant surprise, I must say. I was expecting, especially with the John Wick style character on the front, it to be pure action, but I liked the way that they blended it with a few quieter moments,
Absolutely. I think the John Wick thing is kind of it's a hook, right?
Yeah,
to get the views, but actually
sure.
The game is far better than I expected.
It's got a lot more
most regards.
Substance, and that character's face gives it credit for. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly right. So that's it. Let us know in the comments, as we say. We're going to have a couple of copies to give away, but yeah, real pleasant surprise this one. Thanks to all of you that enjoy the content, to our Patreons and our members, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!